Uh, so first of all, thank you very much for allowing Facebook to come and talk about the Open Graph. It's something we're really excited about, and we were excited about in theory. And now that we've got some early results in, we actually have real reason to be excited about it. Also, thanks to Howard Polskin for inviting us to come speak here. I worked for Howard long enough ago that when he was in New York and I was in Atlanta, he would yell at me by memo because we didn't have Facebook yet. So, we didn't have email yet. We certainly didn't have Facebook. So it was a long time ago. So I think it's always great to start out this conversation with the evolution of the Facebook platform. And it's really important to think about kind of how we got to where we are today. So the platform launched in 2006, and that's when we really made the transition from being a destination to being a platform for our partners to work on. The Facebook Connect launched in 2008. Social Games came in 2009. 2010 is when we launched what we referred to then as the Open Graph. It actually was not nearly as open as it is today, which we'll talk about in detail. And where we are today is really at a place where the web is really reorganizing around people. So when the internet first started, very early on, 1994, 1995, there was the web. There was a finite amount of sites, and we knew where we were going, and we would hear about a site, and we would go there and check it out, and we had a very small number of destinations. And then as sites began to proliferate, and there kind of became too many sites to count and too many sites to know where you're going, we all use Google and search, and we would know exactly what we were looking for. We'd type in 2 or 3 or 4 words and get taken exactly there. And now with this kind of infinite amount of content on the web, we're really starting to understand that people look to their friends to find out what's important to them and within their social graph. The first kind of realization we had with this was when Facebook Photos launched. So when we launched, Flickr was by far the leading photo sharing site. It led the category, and we launched what is very much a rudimentary product. You could do pretty much nothing that you could do on all the other photo sharing sites. There was no way to make a photo that was vertical horizontal, or do red eye reduction, or make coasters, or a tie with a photo, or a book, or anything like that. But we created one very simple product attribute, and that was you could tag your friends, you could share with your friends, and Facebook Photos became, by all measures and what we think today, by the measures that we have, it is just as it is actually the most popular photo sharing site, more popular than actually all the other photo sharing sites on the internet combined. And then we talked about social games very briefly, but I think that there's no one that is going to argue that Farmville is a pretty game, right? It looks like it was made in 1982 on a Commodore computer. Tom Clancy literally writes storylines for the Xbox. But again, one very simple thing with social games, and that is you play with your friends. You can buy your friends a tractor. You can create you build a farm next to your friends. And again, that was ultimately more powerful product attribute than anything else that in the gaming world. And now social games, there are hundreds of millions of people that play social games on Facebook. So we at F8 in September 22nd, announced a number of enhancements to the platform. The first is Timeline, and actually we announced last night that the long-awaited Timeline launch finally happened in New Zealand. So we're starting to test it and roll out Timeline. I think over the next few weeks and months, and depending on how the test goes, we'll all start to see it as our profile transition to Timeline. But what Timeline does is, your profile today is very simple, right? It is what we think about the first 15 or 30 seconds of a conversation. What your name is, where you work, what your relationship status is, very basic things. And what Timeline does is it really allows you to tell the whole story of your life, what you're doing, what you're listening to, what you're watching, what you're reading, kind of everything all the way back to your birth. You can create milestones in your life. This was actually the day I was born with that nice, beautiful head of hair. It's all been downhill from there. So we actually put a kind of a fun video together to show kind of how Timeline works and how you can have some fun with it. And just in case there's any confusion, the Andy that is in the video is not the Andy that is at the podium. We're very different. He's rocking a mullet at some point. I never did.
on, baby.
So again, we're really excited about Timeline. Happy that it's starting to roll out. I think Timeline is going to be great for the scanner business. I spent a lot of time kind of going back into my attic and finding old photos and scanning them. But none with the mullet, I promise. So what what we announced at F8 is the Open Graph, and it's one API that includes distribution across. First of all, not just Timeline. There's a new algorithm for newsfeed. So one of the things that we're trying to figure out from a product perspective is, with all this activity that's going to be driven into the Facebook platform, is how we make sense of it for people and how people make sense of the activity within their social graph. So the algorithm that drives newsfeed now really tries to find the things that are most important to you as an individual based on activity that you've taken with respect to your social graph prior to that. So relationships that we think are important, whether they be with brands, people, no matter what it is, if we think it's important, we're going to surface that in Timeline. So what we've done to complement that is created this ticker on the right side of the page. And what the ticker does is it will show you everything that's happening within your social graph at that given moment. So you look over to the ticker and you see on the right side of your page that your friend is listening to a song, your friend's watching this particular video, reading this article, commenting on a story. Pretty much any activity that's happening within Facebook surfaces in ticker for that moment. In addition, Timeline has these, what we refer to as profile boxes. So what the profile boxes do is they allow you to share the activity that's happening within a particular application back to your timeline for your friends to see. So I think probably the best thing to do is show you this quick demo. I think it helps bring the applications on Facebook and sharing and really brings it to life. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the Open Graph and what we announced at F8 and what it really means. So like I said, when we announced the Open Graph and launched in 2010, it was really around a like button. So the fact is the graph was not open at all. The graph was completely closed, and all you could really do was share the action of like or recommend, depending on what a news site chose to use. So Andy likes The Godfather, very simple and very successful. We drove about 300%, greater than 300% more traffic to our partner sites. But when you think about opening up the graph to really be any verb in the world, so this is, if you are my friend on Facebook, I listen to this song endlessly, so you see this pop up all the time in the ticker. But it could be anything from listen, it could be ran. So really what it allows you as a developer to do is to define, associated with a user, any action and associated with that object. So a little more detail. So actions are activities. Think of them as verbs: watching, listening, adding. Again, it's an infinite amount of actions that a developer can define. And then objects are the things that people interact with in your application. So watching a movie, listening to a song, adding a photo. Again, as a developer, you have the opportunity to define any actions and objects that make sense with your application. So the first thing you need to do to get people involved and sharing their activity from your site and from your application into the Open Graph is to make them an authenticated user. So currently, and this is actually in the process of transitioning, we have an existing authentication dialog that's very generic. Generic on purpose. The strategy was to make sure that it was very clear to people across multiple sites exactly what they were opting into. But what we heard from our developers and what we heard from users is they wanted a little more customization to understand exactly what they were opting into. So we've created a new authentication dialog. It allows our developers to brand the authentication to make it clear to people exactly what they're opting into and on what site and what application. There are default privacy, default activities that people are opting into, as well as permissions that are requested. And then also we allow developers to show their their users and people that are opted into this exactly what it's going to look like on their timeline, so there's no surprises. So there's multiple timeline previews that show exactly what's going to be syndicated back into their timeline. So once somebody has authenticated that application to share their activity, they become what we refer to as an authentic referral. And what we're starting to see in the early days of the Open Graph is authenticated referrals are driving a lot of value to our developers and to our partners. I think a couple of these stand out to me. 175% more time spent, which is pretty incredible, and a 20% lower bounce rate. So that because they're able to create these personalized experiences, more people tend to spend more time on those sites, which is terrific. Also, the analytics are very clear. So first thing that we do is help developers understand how people are getting through the authentication process. So one of the things that we try and ask developers to do is if there are permissions that you might want but not need, is test those, look at your analytics dashboard and look at your insights and determine if there are particular permissions that are turning people off that if you don't need them, then if you're getting a 30% more authentication rate, push it to the side and just get more people in, because ultimately that's going to deliver a lot more value. Also through the Insights dashboard, what we're trying to do is help people understand exactly where, or help developers understand exactly where users are interacting with their content. So you'll be able to see, is this traffic I'm getting more from Ticker than Timeline, or is there particular stories that are more valuable on Timeline to users? So we're really trying to develop our analytics and how we help developers understand the activities that are happening on their site. So really what our goal is with our developers and with our partners is to create this virtuous circle. So you are going to drive new users to your application. Through the authentication process, they're going to be activated. Through a couple lines of code on your site, they'll share that activity back into Facebook. Their friends, people within their graph, will see the activity they're taking, click on it, become authenticated users, publish that activity back, and hopefully, and again, what we're starting to see, and I'll share some metrics with you, drive more users into your application and ultimately more value to your business. So when we launched at F8, we launched with a handful of partners globally. So this is the list, and in the publishing industry, let me kind of dig into some details. We've actually released last week our first set of metrics on what our partners are seeing, our early launch partners are seeing. And again, it makes us, we're feeling really good about where we are and what the future is of the Open Graph. So first of all, there's two different ways to build using the Open Graph. One is within an application on Facebook on a Canvas page. So Zynga Games, Farmville, Cityville, those are on a Canvas page within Facebook. The Washington Post, when they did their Open Graph application, the Washington Post social reader, they decided to do that within Facebook as a complement to WashingtonPost.com. So this is the numbers that they gave us permission to release. So they've activated 3.5 million monthly actives. They are continuing to grow, and I think it's kind of interesting. They're expanding into international audiences, and I think for the publishing industry, and what makes me really excited about this particular application is that 83% of their users are under 35 years old. So it's really been an opportunity for them to engage a new audience that probably wasn't deeply engaged with the Washington Post. The Guardian also chose the route of creating an application within Facebook. The first thing they actually announced was within a month, they crossed the threshold of 1 million users. So that was within the first 30 days. And then after that, they've been installed by nearly 4 million people. They're getting about 1 million extra page impressions from that application specifically every day. And again, what their editor says is that they're reaching an audience that has been very hard to reach for news organizations. So over half of the app's users are under 24. It's pretty incredible. Yahoo News, news.yahoo.com, took a very different approach. They implemented the Open Graph on their existing site, so on their domain. And again, at Facebook, we don't really have an interest in whether you do it within Facebook or on your site. So within news.yahoo.com, what they've done is, first of all, at the top of the page, they show your friends that are also connected and what they're doing. One of the things that I think was really interesting and pretty bold for a news organization is that you see on the left side, your friends. So that is actually the default view that they give you once you're connected to Facebook and once you've authenticated the application. So what they've said is that we think is that your friend's activity is going to be the most relevant to you to navigate our site. And of course, everything else is still accessible, but they decided to show you your friends first. So Yahoo has seen a 600% increase in traffic from Facebook, and then those people are reading more articles because their friends are surfacing articles that are relevant to them. Outside of the news and information and journalism space is Mog. So Mog is a music website. One thing they've done, and the reason why I want to show this, because I think it's a really important and interesting example, is not only do they use the Open Graph, they also use our Graph API, which allows you to look at a person's profile, in this case my profile, and say, here's the music that you've said you like on your profile. So here's the music that we have on our site that we think is going to be relevant to you. And it's been driven a ton of usage for them. Their traffic is up 4x on their domain since they've integrated Facebook Connect. And their CEO calls Facebook the best distribution platform they've ever had. So that, I want to leave some time for Q&A at the end. But we are really excited at expanding our Open Graph partners into the publishing industry, and why I thought this was such a great opportunity to come in and have the opportunity to talk to you, because you guys have, awesome content that is very relevant to an incredibly broad group of people. And I think that once you give them the chance to share their activity and share what they're reading and participating in on your sites into Facebook, is that I think you can wind up driving a number of referrals well beyond what you're getting from Facebook today by leveraging the Open Graph. So there's actually somebody with a microphone. So if you have a question, I'd love to talk more about this. If there are any questions. Not one. Because they speak English, and so it was a good place for us to test, how people interact with Timeline, and just, that seemed like a logical place to start the rollout.
On the Open Graph API, what profile information is available to sites?
So that's all part of the permissions process. So the authentication is about sharing your specific activity, and then any additional permissions you ask for, which is kind of when I went back to that. Make sure you test what you're asking for, because there are some permissions that people tend to be more likely to grant than others. So it's really important to understand what your user base is willing to share with you, and just not make sure you're asking for too much, because you're going to wind up with fewer authenticated users and minimize your upside down the road. Yes, I'll repeat the question. So. Correct. Yes.
So a general question is that you have to be 13 years old to be on the site. I'm coming from a perspective of a company that reaches out to teachers, but the kids are the users in the end. So we're trying to reach both audiences. And so I'm just wondering if Facebook is ever thinking of creating a site that's dedicated to a younger generation as technology is moving forward.
It's a great question, and I don't know the answer to it. Okay. I don't know. I can't imagine people haven't talked about it, but I have no idea where we are. The Open Graph is that simple? You guys are so far ahead of everybody else. Yes? How are we? So there are ad units on there. We've been actually, as somebody who's had Timeline for a long time. Things move around constantly, and we're trying to figure out how to best put advertising within Timeline that don't make users feel like that we are using their timeline to help further our business causes. So, but there is advertising on Timeline. Now they're warming up.
Hey, I'm Simon Brave from Bitly. It's clear that the Open Graph has been a success for the partners, the initial partners you guys have been working with. As more people begin to adopt this service or this interaction with Facebook, do you think that the interaction numbers will be as high as these initial partners? And could you go into EdgeRank a little bit more on how that works?
Sure. So question is, I'll answer the first one first. We'll do it in order, chronological order. So I think that as more and more partners get into the Open Graph, first of all, there'll be more social velocity behind more content. So I think that there's upside for everybody to work in the Open Graph. And I think that one of the things that we've seen that's kind of interesting is that things tend to be successful in niche groups, right? So that, with our very early launch partners, there's not that many, small groups that are covered with information that's hyper relevant to them. So no, I don't think that there is I don't think we're at the end of the Open Graph. I think we're like literally in the early days. So EdgeRank is how we determine what's in Newsfeed, and it is constantly in flux. So what we're trying to do, and what our product team is trying to do very hard, is determine what the strongest signal to you personally is versus all the noise. So what I do know is that how we determine EdgeRank is really based, and how we determine most importantly what's published in Newsfeed, again, is the interactions that you've had before are very telling to the interactions that you want to have in the future. So, if you've liked or commented or shared a particular person or a particular page's content, we know that you're engaged in that, and we're going to make sure to show you that. And if you've never, let's say you have a particular friend, so this is me. You have a particular friend from elementary school, you haven't thought of that person in 35 years, they friend you, you have nothing in common, you never interact with them, we're probably not going to show you their updates because they're just not relevant to you as we determine by the algorithm. And so I think we're going to be right, the majority of the time, and there are going to be some places where we're not. But we're working very, very hard to try and separate the signal from the noise within Newsfeed and make it really, really valuable to everybody who's on Facebook. Yes? So currently, we're just rolling out to individuals. I think that it is very safe to assume that there will be a time in the future where the current design of the page will evolve in some ways to emulate Timeline. But Timeline is really built to tell the story of your life. And so I'm not sure that necessarily the brands and others that have pages necessarily want to tell the story of their life. So we're going to figure out a way that makes that valuable to people that have pages, but it will be a little bit different than the way that it currently is for for people. Yes? I don't know, but I would say that it's people who are programming pages. It's just very important to think about how you can get interesting and innovative and creative ways that you can get people to interact with your page, because ultimately that is going to be the most important signal in how we determine what to publish in a newsfeed. So I have time for one more question before the clock winds down, if anybody has one. Yes? I'm not sure so if a third party builds an app for you, as long as it's under your brand's application ID, which is ultimately what we associate, is that it doesn't matter who builds the application. We're not gonna think about who builds it or who hosts it or anything. It's associated with that specific app ID, and that's how we determine what's published. So thank you guys again very much for allowing us to have the chance to talk about the Open Graph. You guys have a great day.